Hi, welcome to Why These Notes. Today we're going to talk about chord construction and chord substitutions. There are 12 notes in the modern chromatic scale, and I use a clock metaphor for these notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Out of these 12 notes, we use 7 notes, shown here, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, for the major scale. This is called a diatonic scale, di meaning 7, tonic meaning tones or notes. So it's a 7-tone scale. And this is part of the foundation of much of Western harmony, is these 7 notes. The way we build a chord in this scale is we take what we call stacked thirds. So it's every other note, every third note. So from do, we skip re and go to mi. This is a major third because there's a large distance from do to mi, so we call it a major third. And you'll see it's 2 what we call whole steps. This is a half step, this is a whole step. So whenever we skip a note, we call it a whole step. If we don't skip a note, we call it a half step. So the major third, major mi, is 2 whole steps. If we add to this note another third, and we're skipping notes, so mi, fa, so, we skip this. This is a minor third because it's not 2 whole steps, it's a half step and a whole step. So this is a minor third. We get so, which is the fifth note in the musical scale. So taking a major third and a minor third, we get a fifth, and put it all together, and we get the major chord. You may have heard that every chord progression can be reduced to a 1-4-5 chord progression. And if you paid attention to previous lessons, you may have seen me build the major scale from a 1-4-5 chord progression. But to quickly recap, if we already have the major chord, if we move the major chord to the position of the 4th note in the scale, we add the note la, right? So we had do, mi, so from the major chord on do. And then we add the note la by building the same sort of chord on top of fa. And now the only notes we need to find are ti and re, which we find when we move the chord over to so. So, ti, re is the major chord on so. And through this simple thing, we're able to build all of the notes in the musical scale simply by building a major chord on do, fa, and so, 1, 4, and 5. So how do we account for the other chords in the musical scale? And we do this through something called chord substitutions. Now you may notice this dotted line to la. This dotted line represents a minor chord, and I will show you here. If we move this over to here, the first third now becomes a minor third. And as you can see, it's not 2 whole steps, it's a whole step and a half step, which is a minor third, plus a major third, which is 2 whole steps, to get to so. So this is a minor chord, and this shape is a major chord. And the difference is where the middle note is, where the third is. So if we say that every chord is a 1-4-5 chord progression, where do we find all of the other chords? And that's pretty simple. We simply take the relative minor of that major chord. So if this is the major chord do, mi, so, major chord we build on the first note in the musical scale, the relative minor chord is la. And as you can see, the chord la, do, mi is a minor chord. And we can use this to substitute for do, right? It's the minor chord that's most closely related to the major chord do, mi, so. And if we do the same thing on Fa, we have the major chord Fa, La, Do. We simply find the relative minor chord, Re, and we can use this to substitute for Fa. And those of you who are familiar with jazz music, you may know that jazz music, instead of 1-4-5, it's a 2-5-1, and that simply means that they substitute the fourth note Fa. They substitute the second note Re for the fourth note Fa. So they take the relative minor Re and they substitute it for Fa. And then So, the relative minor of the major chord on So is the minor chord on Mi. So if we want to take a substitute for the chord So, we could use the chord Mi. So now we have chords on 1, 4, and 5, as well as the relative minor chords on 6, La, 2, Re as a substitute for Fa, and 3, Mi as a substitute for So. T is a special case, and I won't really get into it in this episode. There's quite a lot more that I think you need to learn before you get into this, but simply put, whenever you're faced with a chord progression and you want to figure out what other chords you can use in place of the chords you're currently using, you can go to the relative minor and build a chord from there and potentially use it in the place of the chord that you want to use. I hope this has been helpful. This is, it's not a complete view of chord substitution. There's a lot more depth to this topic than I've given you, but this is the basic concepts that we use in chord substitution. So if you have a 1-4-5 chord progression and you want to figure out what other chords you can use, you can look to the relative minor. Similarly, if you're analyzing a song and you're trying to figure out the purpose of each chord, why did they use Mi, or why did they use La, or why did they use Re, you can think of it in terms of the 1-4-5 chord progression. What is the purpose of the 1-4-5 chord progression, or what is the purpose of the relative minor chords that are used? And you can sort of, through that, begin to analyze songs a little bit more clearly. I still haven't gotten into the purpose of each of these chords, but that'll be coming up, and I hope that lesson will help clarify things even more for you. My name is Mark, and this has been Why These Notes, basic chord building and chord substitutions.